In this video, we're going to be talking about data. So we're going to start off just going over some basic terms, some basic definitions about data and related topics. Then we're going to briefly look at some things that we might want to consider when obtaining our data, right? Some things to keep in the back of our mind. And just kind of very briefly, very generally talk about how you might go about finding or collecting data, right? Really more about how you collect data. I'm not going to point you to any data sources. And then we're going to talk about what we call the levels of measurement. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on these terms and definitions. Right, the first definition that we're going to have is just the definition of data, right? We're going to be talking about data this entire chapter, so what is it? Right, data, this is just any fact or figure, right? So that's all data is, just information, really. Right, we're not going to dwell too long on that, but that is what data is, any information, right? If we're looking at this shirt, we say, hey, this shirt is blue and checkered, then that's data, right? The next term we're going to talk about is an element. So an element, this is not going to be, you can already see the definition, but you can tell that this is not the same type of element that we would talk about in, say, a chemistry class, right? Or I guess you would. I'm not going to talk about it in a chemistry class. I'm done taking chemistry, right? But it's an entity on which data is obtained. So these are essentially just the members of our sample, right? The members of our sample, right, are the elements. Those are the things on which we collect data, or about which we collect data. All right, so an element can be anything. It could be this shirt, right? It was this shirt a second ago. We collected some data on it, so that shirt, this shirt is an element. A person can be an element, right? Literally anything can be an element. If you obtain data on it, if you collect data on it, it is an element. All right, so the next term we've got up here is a variable or variable, right? Variable is the characteristic of interest, right? So what we are interested in learning about the element. All right, you could add in for a element if you wanted to, right? But it's just the characteristic of interest, right? So this is kind of the question that is actually being answered by the data, right? The data is the answer to the question posed by the variable, right? What color is this shirt? That's the variable, right? Color, right? It's in question format, but we could also just state it as a single word, color, right? What is the color of this shirt, right? Blue, right? That is the piece of data, right? So again, all right, those variables, the characteristics of interest, right? We're gonna talk about variables pretty much throughout the rest of this course, right? Variables are very important, right? One of the reasons that they're very important is kind of in the name, is that they vary, right? So kind of skipping ahead to stuff we don't really need to worry about, at least not for a very long time, right? If we're trying to, say, find an average, right, we're not going to get a single exact number, right? Or we might, but that's not necessarily definitely the average, right? Again, we're going to talk more about this later on, but the root cause of all of this is because our variables change. They change from element to element, right? And So we have to account for that, right? How much of this change is just due to randomness? How much of it is due to something actually having an effect on what we're looking at, right? Again, that's way down the line, way into the future in the semester, right? But again, just kind of point that variable and variables are very important. Right, our next term is observation. So what is an observation? An observation is just a set of measurements for an element. All right, so for just to kind of illustrate this, an observation, right, this would be when we've got a series of questions, or even just one, right, about these elements, right? We go get one of those elements, we ask all of those questions, right? Those are our variables, right? We get an answer back to those questions, that is the data, right? Once we have that for all of the variables, right, or at least as far as we can get with that, right, then those answers all apply to a single element, right? And that group of answers to those questions is known as an observation, right? So a set of measurements for a particular element. All right, we've got one last term. And then we'll try to illustrate some of these concepts a little bit more. All right, so the last term is a data set. All right, long and short of it is that the data set is just all the data, all right, put into a table, really. The more formal definition is that it's all observations collected for a given study or a particular study. Right? That is what a data set is. It's just all of the data that we've collected put into one place. All right, so let's kind of take a look at this a little bit more in depth. Let's say that we are, let's do that. All right, so let's say that we're trying to answer a question. All right, we're answering a question, and that question is, oh no, actually I want to save that, never mind. All right, let's say that we're looking at, we're just collecting data. Maybe we're not trying to answer a question at the moment. All right, so we're just trying to collect some data. All right, so let's say that we are interested in, I don't know. We're just asking people questions, all right? So let's say that we've got this person right here. All right. That's supposed to be a man wearing a bowler hat, and I'm gone fuzzy, waiting to not be fuzzy. There we go. All right, so we've got this man wearing a weird little hat. It's supposed to be a bowler, but I'm not good at drawing, as you're going to find out through the course of this semester. All right, so let's say that we've got this man, and we start to ask him a couple of questions. You wearing a hat? The answer to that, of course, for this guy is yes, he is wearing a hat. We'll say, the you don't really need the question mark, I just put it there. All right, hair color. So we go and we ask the guy, hey, what color is your hair? He says, my hair is brown. All right, and then we ask him, how much money do you make? We ask him what his income is, and he does tell us, and he says that he makes $47,500 per year. All right, so we got this next person. Depending on how clearly you can see this, all right? Actually, it doesn't matter how clearly you can see this. This is a person with, you know, those shaved heads and the hair swooped down. All right, that is what this person is. All right, and so we ask this person, all right, are you wearing a hat? They say no, because it doesn't appear as though they are wearing a hat. All right, we got, what's your hair color? It's red. All right, and then we ask, what is your income? All right, and they say that they have an income of $98,000. All right, so all of this, right, to hopefully illustrate some of these concepts. So let's actually do that. I don't think I mentioned anything as of yet, right? So everything in the cells, right? So the yes, the no, the red, the brown, the incomes, right? That's data, right? That's information. It's facts. It's figures, right? That's what it is, right? Then we look at kind of this idea of elements, right? These two individuals, right, who we asked questions about or asked questions. They are the elements of this study, all right? The variables of this study, the characteristics of interest, what we're interested about, these are just the things that we asked, right? Are you wearing a hat? What color is your hair? What's your income, right? Those are our variables, right? And this is going to be a similar layout, even though this is a kind of a dumb, silly example. This is going to be a similar layout to any data set you see, right? The columns are going to be variables, right? They're going to be representing these different variables. And the rows, right? Those are kind of attached to a specific element, right? In most data sets, you're not going to be able to trace them back. They're going to make it so that you can't do that, right? Well, it depends on what data you're looking at and how you obtained it, I guess. But again, right? These rows are tied to these elements, and so these rows are the observations, right? So each row is an observation, right? That observation is tied to a particular element, whether we can, identify them or not. Right? I think that's everything. Data, yes. Element, variable, observation, data set. And then again, the whole thing would be the data set, right? This entire thing. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is just some things about when we go to collect data. All right, we're going to start first by just talking about things that you should do before you start collecting your data. All right, so most of the time, or really all the time, every single time that somebody goes and collects data, they're doing it for a reason. And a lot of the time, that reason is they have a question, right? They have a question that they want answered, or somebody else has a question they want answered, and they're paying them to collect the data, right? But again, most of the time, it's because they have a question. right? So when you are trying to answer a question, right, using statistics, right, if you're going to go about it by collecting your own data, right, then one thing that's very important is to clearly define the question that you are asking, right? You need to clearly define that question for a couple of reasons, right? One, right, it's going to tell you which variables you need to include, right? Which variables you need to collect data on, right? If you're not really sure what your question is, right, you might miss out on some important variables, right? Kind of the, best case scenario, you just have to go back and find that data, right, and incorporate it into your study, right? Worst case scenario, maybe it's not there and you didn't realize it and it was really important, and so now you just have this missing piece, and that can really mess things up. All right, but we do want to clearly state that question, all right, so we know what variables we need to collect. All right, the next reason is because the question is going to determine the level or the type of data. All right, so type of data, right, I put level here, right, this is talking about the level of measurements I mentioned at the top of this video, right. We haven't gotten to there yet, but it is going to be important. It's going to kind of tell us, what type of data is really appropriate for different methodologies, right? Some things we can do certain things with some types of data we can't with others, right? And so it's going to tell us, all right, what type of data, all right, what level of data that we are looking for. All right, and then beyond that, all right, so they're very similar, these last two, so that the level and then just whether or not, right, so telling you which level of measurement to use, right, or what level of measurement needs to be used for your data, right, and then also is the data appropriate, right, and so this gets down to just a fundamental question of, is this data going to be helpful in answering your question, right? So let's say that we are looking at the relationship between income and retirement age, right? So maybe we just want to say, does an income level, right, have an effect on at what age you retire, right? Answer's probably yes on that. But let's say we're not sure, we want to test just to make sure, right? Because actually I don't know if that's true or not, but it might not make much of a difference, right? So again, we're talking about appropriate data, right? If I get data on the year people were retired, right, or the year people retired, that's not going to really do me a lot of good. That data is not really appropriate to the question that I'm asking, right? If I just have the year, right, that doesn't help me at all, because I'm looking at to see if income affects how old you are when you retire or when you make that decision to retire, right? So just having the year you retired, not going to be helpful to us, right? If I also had, the date of the year of birth, right, that's a different story, right? I could work it, it'd be annoying, but I could work it out, right? But if it was just year of retirement, not going to do us a lot of good, right? So that would not be appropriate data to answer our question. On a related note, another thing that it's very important to define, not just for when you're going to collect data, but just generally always. Definition is very important just in statistics in general. The way we define things is going to determine how we interpret our results, right? And how we actually apply those results to the world, right? So it's very important to define your population clearly. That's what I was building up to, right? Definition is very important, right? One place it's really important is in what our population is. All right, I'm probably not going to write down a whole lot of stuff for the rest of this, but again, define your population clearly define it. Again, this is going to determine a couple of things, right? It might help determine what variables are important in the study, right? It might point you in the direction of where you're going to go find your sample, right? And it's also going to, as I said previously, it's going to determine how you interpret your results, right? If you want to, look at something about, I don't know. Well, okay, so this might, no, that's not a great one. All right, but let's say that you're looking at success rates, right? Success rates for in classes, right? You want to see the test, okay, here we go. Finally. Let's say that we're looking at grade point average, right? And let's say that we're looking at grade point average for the entire school. Let's say that's what we're interested in, right? So we're looking at all Calhoun students, right? We want to get an idea or get some information about grade point averages, right? So if we go out and we define our sample like that, we go out and we try to collect or define our population as such, and then we go out and we, during a normal semester, only get information about grade point averages from students who are attending face-to-face classes, right? That might not be the best solution, right? That might not be necessarily representative of all Calhoun students, right? There are a lot of students that only take classes online, right? Is there a difference between those who, well, really the real question is there a difference in grade point average, right, between those who take classes online and in person, right? If there is, right, only sampling face-to-face people when you're trying to get an idea of the entire school's population, that's going to be problematic. That might not give you the results that you're looking for, at least not results that are valid. All right. So again, it's very important, right, to define that population clearly, right? If our sample doesn't match, right, our population, then we either need to look for another sample or we need to change how we define our population, right? For various reasons, right? The big one is that just your interpretation is not going to be accurate, right? You're going to be basing estimates and inferences for one subgroup on the group as a whole, right? And I'm not just talking about the differences in population and sample, but I'm saying there's one group in that population that is different from other groups, right? If you only apply, or if you only get stuff from that group, right, you're not going to have great results. All right, but I digress. I kind of rambled on that long enough. All right, but again, very important to define your population. It's something that we also kind of touched on in chapter 1, the last video, right? I don't know what order you're watching these in. In the video for chapter 1, right, we talked about kind of our differences between population and sample, and depending on how we defined our population, right, that's going to make some differences, right? Same thing, it's very much true here as well. How we define that population is very important, right? Kind of referencing last, in our chapter 1 video, depending on how we define that population is going to determine whether or not we're talking about a parameter or a statistic, right? If we're saying that our population as a whole is Calhoun students, and then we've got this group of students that we've gotten data from, right? That's a sample, that's a statistic. If we're saying that the population is just this group of students that we collected and we get data from them, right, then it's a parameter, right? So it is very important to remember what you were going to say, but to define your population, right, and clearly define it. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about kind of actually getting some data, right? Again, we're not really getting into how to collect data or anything like that. That's kind of beyond this class. But we're going to talk about just brief overview, 2 ways that you can obtain data, right? And those 2 ways are through experiments, right? So controlled experiment, kind of laboratory experiments, and through observation. All right, so you guys probably have probably can just intuit a definition of experimental data that comes from these controlled experiments, but we're going to put here just in case. And to be honest, this one's probably not even as good as the one you have in your mind, but we'll see. All right. All right, so experimental data, again, this isn't the best definition, but it's all right. So experimental data is the result of applying, or I guess it's just result, not that it matters. All right, result of applying a treatment to experimental units, all right? So that's kind of an obtuse definition, but is a way for me to get it condensed and actually still make sense, at least to me. All right, so just in case it doesn't make sense to you, we'll just talk about it a little bit more. All right, we'll just talk about it in terms of a controlled experiment. All right, so again, experimental data, this is where we are actively taking part in what we're looking at, right? We are actually orchestrating events so that we can observe something which is different from the observational stuff, all right, as we're going to talk about in just a moment. All right, here we are actually setting up a scenario so that we can take measurements and see what happens, right? Usually we're looking at trying to find like kind of a cause and effect thing, or see if something is significant, right? So drug trials are probably kind of the most famous examples of this kind of data collection, right? If we're testing a new drug, let's say that I don't really know, some drug that is supposed to help people with thyroidism, right? Let's say that's what we're looking at. My brother has it. I don't really. So if you have thyroidism, I'm sorry, because I'm just gonna not understand what's going on with you. But I know it's something with the thyroid, right? But let's say that the thyroid, I don't know, doesn't make something or makes too much of it. That's something. Anyways, right? And the doctors are trying to figure out a way to stop that, to get the right amount to be produced, right? So what they might do is they might take some laboratory animals, right, mice or rats or something, right? They might give one group, right, might split them up, give one group this drug and another one a kind of a placebo, right? So it doesn't have any of the active ingredients. It's just, I guess, do you have to give rats placebos? I don't know if you do. Anyways, I should ask somebody about that. Regardless, right? So you have two groups, so you get kind of a treatment getting the drug and a control that's not getting the drug, right? And so you look and see, well, after the treatment, right, at the end, are the levels of this chemical that your thyroid produce, are they the right level or not, right? And because it was a controlled experiment, and because kind of probably, especially with laboratory animals, everything else was the same, right? You can say, well, this group of mice that got the treatment, they had pretty close to what you'd expect, your normal levels of this hormone, right? The group that didn't get it either was way high or way low, right? And you can tell, oh, well, that drug must be effective because we've got this control group versus this treatment group. All right, that's the general gist, taken a little bit farther than we are. We're just talking about data. So this would just be giving the rats the treatment and then checking their thyroid level or whatever, right? So that would be our experimental design, right? We can do these, they're not just in science, in the hard sciences. We also see them in social sciences, although it is less common just because, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of those is that we are part of the group that's being experimented on, right? Also, there are moral issues depending on what you're trying to study, right? And it's very costly, all right? In the business world, I doubt, I assume it's somewhat comparable to economics, right? Or just the kind of academia, right? You're not going to see a whole lot. I would be surprised if you saw a lot of experimental data kind of in the business world. All right, but that is our experimental data. All right, so let's move on to our observational data. In my experience, observational data is much more common. All right, we're going to see this much more frequently. All right, I'll be honest, I don't love this definition of observational data either, all right? But it's the result of recording observable phenomena. All right, and so I want to explain a little bit about this, right? So it's different from experimental data, right, in that we aren't causing this stuff to happen, all right? So in experimental data, all right, or a controlled experiment, right, the researcher is orchestrating events, right, or orchestrating things so that they can see this difference, right? They're given this group of rats the medicine and not this one, right? They're doing those kinds of things, right? They are active participants in conducting the research, right, and in gathering that data, well, and producing that data, I guess you could say. Right, that's not the case with observational data. In the observational data, you're just observing. And most of the time, it's not like you're sitting there with a pair of binoculars, you know, watching people and writing stuff down. Most of this data is going to be either you're going to have to pay for it, or you're going to have to go find it, or just get somebody to give it to you. So things like the census, right? The census is is just full of observational data, right? We just kind of ask people to give us this data, all right, we got it, right? If you look at kind of stock prices, all right, from, you know, day to day, right, those are observational. You're just looking at what number is on the ticker after end of close, right, and you write that down, right? You're not doing anything to have any effect on that. You're not changing it. You're just writing that down, right? A company's sales revenue, cost reports, all right, all that kind of stuff, expense reports, probably what they call them, you know, wages, you know, all that kind of stuff. Those would be observational data, right? Examples of observational data. That's what I was looking for. All right, so that is what observational data is. All right, so that's going to end our brief discussion on just kind of data collection. Again, we're not going to get into this class really much at all. All right, we might talk about it a little bit later in chapter 8 in a little bit more detail. That'll kind of depend on several things, right? But let's move on for now. So that's where we're going to end this video. We will continue talking about chapter 2 and going over chapter 2 in the next video. So we're going to have a part 2 for this. In that video, we will actually get to those levels of measurement that we talked about at the beginning of this video. All right, so I will see you in the next video.